What we're going to look at today is the Infantry Tank Mark III, commonly referred to as the Valentine tank. The Valentine's made up about a quarter of all British wartime production for tanks, about 6,855 of these vehicles, along with the Canadians who built about 1,420. So there was over 8,700 of these vehicles produced. 45% of the production run, so just over 3,000 vehicles, got sent to the Soviet Union. So there's 3 or 4 plausible ways of how this got its name. First one, it was a book written in 1972 by Brian Perrott called Valentines in North Africa. He suggests in his book that the name Valentine was introduced to the War Office on or around about the 10th of February 1938, so hence the name Valentine, Valentine's Day. Second one, it could have been that one of the designers, which was Sir John Valentine Carden, so he was a tank designer in the UK, and he helped design a lot of tanks before this one. He died mid-December 1935, so that could have been in recognition for his name to go to this tank. Last one, and probably the most feasible one, was that Vickers used this as a code word for their vehicle, because Vickers was a private company. So a code word could have been Vickers Armstrong Limited, Elsick, Newcastle upon Tyne, Valentine. So I'll leave it up to the viewers to make up their own decision of how this got its name. There was 11 different marks that were produced. The Mark 8 didn't get produced because that's when a new engine and gun design was coming in. Within those 11 marks, there were a number of changes along the way. 3 different types of tracks. First was a cast 2-pin track. The second one was a pressed 2-pin track. It was said that the pressed track gave it good mobility. However, being dual pin, that was considered a bit of a weak point. Third one, which we can see on this vehicle, is the skeletal track. Now this is a 1-pin track, and you'll see this on the majority of Valentines. So the suspension on this vehicle is quite an interesting suspension. So this was designed by Sydney Hortsman along with John Carden and the Go Slow Suspension Company. So this suspension was initially on the A10 Cruiser. So on the suspension you have the coil spring. Within the coil spring is a dual action shock absorber, so it works both in compression and extension. Obviously we've got a large road wheel at front, one at the back. So when we're going cross country, it's easier for a larger road wheel to climb over an obstacle rather than a smaller one. So this is the brake drum, which also includes the epicyclic steering. So this whole hub spins at a ratio of 10.2 to 1. So this hub, when it's driving, is spinning really fast. So the brakes are included in that, the steering's included in that, and we have these little ridges here. So like anything metal, if we're using heat and friction, you want to be able to dissipate that heat, so hence they've got little ribs on here. But if you see videos of these driving, this one is spinning at 10 times the speed of what the drive sprocket is. So the speed of the Valentine tank was 24 kilometres an hour, but in saying that, compared to the Matilda, it could get to that speed quicker, being 9.5 tonnes lighter than the Matilda. With Valentines, they had 3 different engine types along the way. So Valentine Mark I came out with the AEC A189 6.9 litre petrol engine. So this gave it about 135 horsepower. When we go into Mark II, which this one is, this has the diesel engine in it. So this is the AEC A190 diesel, gives it about 131 horsepower, but it's a 6.95 litre diesel engine. So Marks 2, 3 and 6 had the AEC 190. When we go to Mark 4, that's where we go into the GMC 671 diesel, or 6004. This was rated at about 135 horsepower, right up to Mark 11, where we still see the same engine, but now we're increasing the horsepower to 165 horsepower. Holds about 123 litres of fuel. On the outside you can fix the extended fuel tanks, similar to what we have on the Matilda, and that can carry 200 litres. On the back slope here, behind these 2 doors, we have the radiators. Now very early on they changed the design of these air intake grills because they actually had a very large gap in between them. All the vents were actually closed up somewhat to prevent that ability for somebody to get their hand in or put a grenade in there. So when we look at Valentines from Mark 1 to Mark 10, they are riveted and bolted. When we go into Valentine Mark 11, it's a welded hull. Because they were meant to replace the Matilda, so they were a lighter tank. So to be lighter, you have to have less armour. So this was about 9 tonnes lighter than the Matilda. The Soviets, they did add extra plate along the way, but essentially this plate here is about 18 millimetres thick. Glacis plate is about 32 millimetres thick, but it's angled at about 20 degrees from horizontal. So the line of sight penetration just for this part here is about 93 millimetres. So it's quite good. And we have our little shot traps along here to catch any small arms fire coming into the driver's vision port. On the front here, this is about 32 millimetres thick. And once we start getting on top, it thins down quite considerably. When we talk about the turret, there's different thicknesses along the way because we have different modifications for the turret. But on the front, we have essentially 65 millimetres. On the rear of the turret, we have 65, but around the sides, we initially start off with 60 millimetres, and in a later turret variants, we go around the sides to about 50 millimetres. We had 3 different guns along the way. So when we look at the initial ones, so Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 4, we've got the 2-pounder gun. So good in European standards up to about 1942. From there, it becomes pretty much an obsolete gun, more of a door knocker. Mark 3 and 5, the whole mantlet changes. So in order to put an extra crew member in that turret, we had to move the whole gun mantlet forward about 8 inches or about 20 centimetres. So within the marks, you can see the actual difference between the mantlets that are on the front. It's not until we get to Mark 9, Mark 10, we introduce the 6-pounder gun. From there, we lose that third crew member again and go back to a 2-man crew in the turret because it's a bigger gun. When we get to Mark 11, that's where we introduce the 75mm gun. The 6-pounder was a good introduction. It gave it quite a high muzzle velocity of over 800 metres per second, so it was a good anti-tank gun. So this is the Mark II variant of the Valentine. So we've got the recessed gun mount to start off with. The pistol port here was very early on. It's sort of oval in shape in this part here. Later variants went to just a circular pistol port. When we come to the back of the turret, a change that we see late 1941 is the rear bustle here. So late 1941 we went from the number 11 wireless set to the number 19 wireless set. So the bustle size has increased. So the initial one come to about this first vent, and then the second one to include that number 19 radio set increase the bustle. And there's also an air vent that goes underneath and the 2 radio antenna mounts on top. The left-hand side where the gunner would have been, you've got the little aperture there. So for the 2-pounder gun, this was the number 30 telescope. So this had a magnification of 1.9 and a field of view of about 21 degrees. When we go into the 6-pounder, we start using the number 39 telescope in either Mark II or Mark IV. This gives us anywhere from a 1.9 up to a ×3 magnification. But when we go to ×3 magnification, our field of view goes to about 13 degrees. Essentially for a vehicle that had a large production run, they were then replaced by better vehicles as they come along. So when they started to become obsolete, we started re-rolling the hulls. We can look at a good use of the Valentine hull with the Archer self-propelled gun. So this one was restored by the museum staff. So Glenn and Beau did this very early on within the museum's works. So if you'd like to see more of Glenn and Beau's restoration works, please feel free to watch Workshop Wednesdays, or better still, come into the museum and see their work firsthand.